Good morning or good afternoon, ladies and gents. I think I got to delay myself like 10 seconds. I've been noticing that on prior streams. I'll hit record, I'll go live, and I'll start talking, and then I go back to check it out later, and I start midway through sentence. So, yeah, it has been a long time since I popped in here to do a stream, and I really apologize for that, guys. The, um, the university has been wrapping up. We've been making plans for COVID 19, and it's all been a little bit crazy. And I've had a cohort of students graduate and all that kind of stuff. But I'm sort of eager to dive in and pick up on one of the many, many topics I discuss on my stream and sort of continue on. I'm dying to get back to my writing stream and my character concept art for Phoenix. That's coming. So once I can sit back and take a breath, we'll dive into that. But today's topic is Blender versus the Universe Episode 3. Right. So it has been a struggle. I've been a little bit frustrated, but not via any shortcoming of Blender whatsoever. It's just learning new software, right? There's a lot of stuff. You sort of forget how much stuff actually is built into your muscle memory of using a previous piece of software. And I've jumped from XSI to Max to Maya. So you'd think this would be a no-brainer for me. No, it's still difficult. Simple little things like isolate select or gross selection on faces or in Maya you can toggle a sub-object selection to be another sub-object. So if I had a group of vertices selected, I could toggle it, change that to UV selection set. Little things like that, little navigational things, little quirky things. But I know given time, I'll find the rhythm of Blender and it'll all be fine. So it's not a big deal. It's not a reason to hate a particular piece of software. On the other hand, there's a lot of stuff to love about the software. So today is just sort of a little bit different. I've walked through a setup for a project that we're doing that we're in the pitching stage, so we need to come up with a good pre-visualization piece or a little animatic of some kind. So I thought, what better excuse to use Blender than something like that, right? So what I did was I went through an initial setup. I had two projects that I've set up inside of Blender in terms of animatics. And I've done screen captures, and I'm just going to post them up for my artists to sort of follow through so that they can understand. I've got 3 concept artists who have never used Blender before, so I'm going to try to stitch together the screen grabs and talk them through it. So I thought I might as well pop on here and walk you guys through it at the same time. As well, I'll link this in for my artists so that they can watch the stream. So it's kind of like an offline lecture, I suppose. So let's get started. Now I'm going to pop the in-depth instructions on here. The Animechanics Discord channel, the one that's sort of linked in with the Twitch stream. So it's got an open invitation, so you guys can hop in and join in if you like and contribute, or you can also add your own thoughts to these particular areas. I'm hoping I don't have to, in the announcements section, I'm hoping I don't have to post, the stupid no profanity, no bullying, none of, I'd like to think that first of all, there's a targeted mindset for people who seek this type of thing out. And generally people who do seek this type of stuff out are either professional digital artists or aspiring digital artists. So, let's just talk business, eh? This is a place to just talk shop. Okay, so I'm going to go into, I don't have any software specific channels here. And I'm just debating in my head whether or not to do that. I think if we went software specific, but then things could get buried in the software specific area. So perhaps I will leave that. One other feature about the Discord channel that's associated with this is that I will hop open a Twitch live chat like a call-in radio show, and I'm going to give this a little bit of a try. So you guys can pop in and say hello or do whatever if you like. Keeping in mind that this is streaming to Twitch and also to YouTube and to my a couple of different social media accounts. So anything you do or say will be preserved for posterity. All right, so let's pop in here. I'm going to let's just try to make a generic concept art storyboards. Let's do just one from Previs, right? Okay, so in the Previs channel, here's where I'll start to pop stuff up. So let me go in here. Let's jump straight in. So I've got my image sequences set up here. Okay, so I'm pulling the first image here. Now I gotta kind of remember what I was doing when I took this screenshot. Okay, so so I guess on initial launch of Blender, and in here I'm using 2.833, I want to say. Let's just call it 2.83. That's a nice safe way to do it. Okay, so on initial launch of Blender, in the layout window, I'm splitting the pane to get set up to prepare for creating my animatic shots as Blender scenes. Okay, so let me pop that up, right? Okay, so in this first particular image, I wonder if this will work. I don't know. I've never done this before, but I'm hoping that this will help you guys because you have screenshots to kind of follow along with a little bit of context here. All right, so what I'm actually doing is I'm taking the sort of Explorer window. I've actually got Blender open. Why don't we do that? So here you can see that all the screenshots that I'm posting will be pertaining to this, which I've done today. But you can see over here, I sort of like having my scene collection here, like my outliner, so I can see exactly what's going on in here. But I also like to see my scenes here, because what I've done is I've set up my asset library scene, my edit scene, which is where I stitch together the animatic, and I'm creating my shots. So one scene per shot. And I know you can have multiple cameras inside of a scene, but I'll come back to that. It's just my own preferred way of organizing myself, right? And then so in the edit window, or in the edit scene rather, in the video editing window, this is where I will be constructing my sequences and putting them together, right? So let's go back here and we'll pop back into the layout. And we'll hit 0 to go into the layout camera. I'm discovering some really, really exciting and cool things that I enjoy working with, which I think will show up in the screen grabs as well. So let's take a look at the next sort of step, and we'll talk a little bit about this. This looks just like... no, I think I was just showing the end result of that. Okay, so let me bring this guy over. And here I'm... set up your shot camera. So in the render dimensions, you can choose your format, etc. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about this, right? So yeah, here's the interesting thing. The rendering setup, I suppose the best way to explain it is the way Maya sort of sets it up, right? And oftentimes, when I was younger, I used to get things a little bit confused in terms of, well, where are my view settings? Where are my project settings? Where are my render settings? I think what the confusing thing is when you open up a Premiere project, right? One of the things that you do straight away in a Premiere project is you set your image format and then you set your frame rate and all that sort of stuff inside of Premiere. Whereas most CG packages generally keep things sort of separate. What do I mean by that? Well, if we take a look at, we pop back into Blender again. If I come down here, you'll see that for the camera, we have our output properties. Now, the output properties is an area that's sort of separate. You're working your project, but your project's formatting is independent of your output formatting, right? Quite a lot of CG software works in this manner. It has to deal with encompassing things like linear workflow and multi-format editing and compositing and all this kind of stuff. So you generally set things like your image resolution and your frame rate in some kind of an output node, or an output, in this case, an output, what do you call these? File tabs, right? So this is your output properties, right? And you'll find that as well inside of Maya with the common properties tab when you go into render settings, right? So basically, it's saying, look, inside your project context, inside of CG, you can pull in various different formats of stuff. You can bring in a 320 by 280 JPEG. You can bring in a PNG. You can bring in an OpenEXR. You can bring in a 8K a DPX file. You can all mix it all together. But when you finally cook it out, you have to choose one format to cook it out to. And this also involves a color space as well, but I'll save that for later. So here, I want everything to finally spit out to the 4K. Well, actually, you have a few convenient little presets here. So I generally choose the 4K UHD TV. That's a rapidly growing sort of image resolution format that's sort of kind of filtering into the market with the rise of 4K TVs, right? And of course, we're using 24 frames per second for two reasons. It's very conducive to animating. Conducive to me as an animator who learned how to animate for film. So 12 frames a second and all that kind of stuff, animating on twos. But it's also what gives the, quote, film look, that 24 frames per second frame rate. And there are different reasons for visual acuity and things like that that I won't discuss at the moment. There are reasons why the 24 frames per second figure was arrived at. Had a lot to do with technology, had a lot to do with the wavelength of signal processing, all kinds of other stuff. So if you want a deeper kind of explanation of that, I can most definitely get into that at a later date. As well as the decision to do 24 frames per second also had to do with the persistence of vision. You know, again, balanced with the cost of film stock. What is the minimal amount of film stock that we need to invest in? Man, I'm bad for this, guys. Going on tangents. So there we go. All of that just to say, set up your scene camera. All right, so here we go. So set up the various scenes. I think creating set up the various scenes to create 3 areas. Set up the various scenes to create 3 areas to work in. Good enough, right? So I think I walk through that in another screenshot. So that's that. So I'm just going in and, oh, that's not where you create a scene. I remember this. Made a mistake there. So I want to delete this guy because that's not really how we do it. Okay, so a little bit further along. Let's see. I'm just flipping through here. I'll let you guys see this because I'm putting this together real time. So, yeah. So initially what I'd done was I'd set up the scenes separately, and I realized that I need to make all 3 scenes in the same Blender file. So here's me going through all of this stuff. Is that where? That's where it's at. Okay. All right. So this. Let's see. There you go. Okay. Create a new scene in the single Blender file. Okay. So let's start there. right? And I'll talk a little bit about what I'm doing here. Okay. So here, create one scene for your first shot. Just want to make sure. Okay, so I've set the scene camera. Okay, so I'm starting to set up the structure for building my animatic, right? So I generally drop a shot one scene in there just to get started. It's sort of a placeholder, and we'll start to kind of think about the other shots that we want to put in when we take a look at the script snippet. But let's go in here, and this one is, there we go. Create one scene for your assets. Now, this kind of confused me a little bit because I'm used to referencing assets into your scene. But near as I can gather, Blender has a two-step process with which to reference, right? So not only do you create your Blender files that you link into your asset library scene, you then instantiate, which is really just reference within the Blender scene from the asset library to your shot one. I'll show you how that works in just a second. All right. So hopefully I did this logically. Okay. So this is reference or link your external Blender file into your asset library. Okay. So here's where things get a little sticky. Okay, so the first scene we created here is your shot. It should be pretty much empty. I've deleted all the default objects that come with it, like the default camera, the default, all that kind of stuff, because I like to create that on my own, right? So once that's done, I'll create another scene for my assets. Do I have... Oh, up in here, you create the scene here. So this is what I gotten wrong before. But if you want to create a new scene inside of your Blender file, you create it up here. So I'll show you guys. Let's pop over into Blender, right? So let's say I'm up here and I've got all of my asset library, my edit. Let's say I want to create a shot 2. Well, you can come up here, click on this, and click new. It'll create a new scene, right? So I can put a new scene in there. They've got a few other options. You can copy settings, you can link copy, you can do a full copy, but we won't need that for now. In fact, I recommend not doing it for the first animatic that you put together, even though that there's a little bit more work that you need to do to get everything put together. Because once you start introducing instancing and copying and referencing and linking and all that kind of stuff, things can get quite confusing quite quickly. So the best thing to do, even though you may end up recreating cameras and things like that, is to just pop in here, create a new scene, right? And in this scene, I'm just going to call it, shot 2. And I give it a bit of a number padding, right? And then it organizes itself nicely in my scene view, right? So here, this is my scenes view, and this is my view layer, which is like my outliner, right? So when I pop into my shot 1, I've got collections for my DOP, my set, and my animation, which, again, I get into in the screen grabs. So I'm just going to pop this out. So there's that, setting that up. Now, this reference or link your external blend file will require me to go outside here, and let's pop into here, and we'll open the File Explorer so we can take a look at the file structure here. All right. By the way, just for you guys who are curious, I'm organizing this project using Perforce for version control and F-Track to track our progress. Okay, so let's go into the content folder. And inside the content folder, when we take a look at our sets, you can see that I have an additional Blender file called AST SO1 Psych Ward Blend, right? So this is AST is short for asset, and then SO1 is set 1, and then we've got our psych ward version 1, right? So how does this work? Let's pop over into Blender, right? If we come in here, you can see when I go to my open recent, I've got the teaser here for ONWM. This is the short teaser project that we're working on, the animatic. And then we have the AST, or the asset blend file for Psych Ward 1. These two are connected, right? In fact, I might just come over here like this and print screen that. And we'll come over here, and in here, I'll just make a real quick note that assets linked into the asset library scene, library scene exist outside the project as a separate Blender file, right? So there's some issues with this, which I'll talk about in just a sec. We're 16.07.16, 16.07.16, and then I'll say this is 16.07.17, so that it fits 16.07 and 17, right? So it just follows on there. And we'll pop back into the Discord channel, and I will just take that. Let's hit F5 to refresh my Explorer window. And there we go. Create a separate Blender file for each linked asset brought into the animatic, right? So there's a problem with that. You know, for the sake of, I guess, keeping things nice and simple, I created an overall Blender file that had everything for the psych ward inside of it. Well, that ran into some issues for me a little bit later on with prop placement, but we'll get to that when we get to it. Okay, so, so here, it looks like create one scene for your final edit timeline. Okay, so let's take a look at this guy here. All right, so what I did was, again, I went up to this create new scene icon, created a new scene, and just called it edit. Now, I'll show you the reason for this, right? If I were to come into my shot 1, right? So I've selected my shot 1 scene. You can see it's a shot 1 scene here. And I went to my video editing timeline, and I wanted to add a shot. I can't add shot 1 to itself, because each of the scenes acts as a container for various data and assets and things like that. So I cannot add my container to itself, if that makes any sense. So I make an empty container, which I call edit, right? So this edit container, it's just an empty scene. It's purposefully empty because I can add all of my other scenes to it, right? So if I come in here, I'm in my edit scene. The video editing tab is just for this edit scene, so it should be empty, which it is, right? And I go to add, and I can add, there it is. I can add shot 1 or I can add shot 2. I can add asset library if I wanted, but you don't want to do that, right? So here is where I can just simply come in here and add shot 1, and it appears. See? Right? And that's my container. Okay, but I get to that a little bit later in these screen grabs as well. Okay, so let's pop down to the next one. Specific. Okay, so yeah. Okay, so in your separate asset Blender file outside the animatic project, the animatic Blender file, populate this with the assets you will be needing in your animatic. Actually, it just dawned on me that we might not need to have a separate Blender file for each, because Blender has this wonderful capacity to be able to interrogate a Blender file and pull specific things out of it. I'll show you that in a sec. But yeah, that's a little bit of a relief, because I didn't want to go in and create a Blender file for every single prop. Okay, so there's that. Let's pop in here. And so here's the thing. Oh yeah, this is pretty self-explanatory, right? Blender links or references have to be .blend files. So this caught me a little bit off guard. Most CG applications or software will allow you to reference in or link in OBJ's FBX, a multitude of different file formats. So I was quite surprised when I went to create a link inside of Blender, and it would only allow me to select a blend file. So I had to rethink my strategy in terms of how I was going to set up my base assets. But that's all cool. I totally get it. I understand it. It's actually a much more efficient way if you package things inside of a Blender wrapper, and I'll show you why, because of the ability to kind of interrogate a file, or it's oftentimes referred to as swizzle or parse, or you can go in and pull individual pieces out of the Blender file. Something that we will explore in much more of an advanced stream that deals with USD, the Universal Scene Descriptor file format from Pixar, which takes this whole concept that Blender has to a super advanced level. But let's save that talk for later. So I'm going to pop this in here, and this particular screenshot is a big one. Oh yeah, okay, so this is just me populate this AST Blender file with imported live FBX assets. So I'll explain that in just a sec here, right? Because I'm used to working with pipelines where you can reference a reference of a reference into a reference. But at some point, there has to be the original file, right? So FBX is sort of a universal standard so far, to deal with geometry, animation, and cameras, right? So if you're working with multiple pieces of software like Maya and ZBrush and something else, right, then you can export to FBX, and then you can assemble your final FBXs into your Blender file. It seems quite convoluted when I explain it that way, but there are sort of reasons for utilizing an FBX pipeline, and I'll talk about it later. And there are ways of automating it as well, so all you have to do is hit save, and in whatever DCC or digital content creation package you're working with, and it'll automatically spit out an FBX. But that's for larger pipeline considerations, right? So here in this screen grab, I'm just showing this is my asset file, right? Remember, I had the two Blender files, one for all my assets and the other one for the actual animatic. So here inside this asset Blender file is where I do all my importing. So we're building out the psych ward here for this this particular project. So I need things like wheelchairs, operating tables, pills, things like that, doctor's stethoscope, right? So I'm bringing all those FBX files into this one Blender file, which may or may not have been a mistake, but we'll see. Okay, so with that, let's see, what was I doing here? Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. So here, setting up. So set up your gizmo. Now I don't know if I needed to do this, right? But inside of Blender, I didn't. Blender's got this really interesting way of handling transforms. So if I hit a G for translate or R for rotate or S for scale, the minute I move the mouse, it's automatically doing it, which is kind of cool. Some people find it annoying, but what was the other piece of software? Unreal Engine works very similar to that in a lot of ways, right? So I sort of enjoy that. And if you're comfortable with placing things in 3D space, i.e. you're one of those freaks that can place things in the perspective view and know exactly which axis you're on, which I'm sort of getting there. A little bit hit and miss with that, then this is perfect for you, right? But if you're just starting out, the relationship with 3D space and working inside of your visual acuity in terms of 3D space, recognizing 3D space, and working through that flat 2D translation of the screen in terms of navigating the 3D world, there's not a connect yet, right? So so let's say I'm taking a hat and putting it on a snowman, right? You might move it in the perspective when I go, oh, okay, that's sitting on the snowman, good. And then the minute you rotate, the hat's like way over here and the snowman's way over there, right? So some people who, I think all 3D artists who, given enough time working inside of 3D space, will be able to do that intuitively after a while. But it takes a little bit of getting used to. There's several steps of psychological translation that happen between looking at a 2D representation of 3D space and actually thinking in terms of 3D. So that's me setting up my gizmo. Man, I never used to be the kind of person who went on these wild tangents all the time. I hope you guys find it interesting. All right. So, setting up my initial props. Okay, so here we go. We're still inside my asset Blender file. I'm bringing all the stuff I told you about. The bed, the wheelchair, the plants, the IV pole, all that kind of stuff. And I'm initially placing it the way I want it inside this asset file, which might have been a mistake because when I reference or link this into my animatic file, I cannot move these props. Or can I? I just think that I just thought that there might be a way for me to be able to do it, but I will investigate that in a second. But this is me setting up my set dressing and getting it ready to place animations in. Okay, so let's pop into here. To populate your shots, use collection instancing. Okay, so with this one, we are now back. Look at the name of the Blender file. We are back into our Teaser 1 Animatic 1 Blender file, which is empty, right? And inside this particular file, let me pop open Blender and I'll show you. Let's go to our, in here, and we'll go back to layout. So in here, this is the empty. It's grayed out for a reason. I'll explain that in just a sec, right? So this is empty, and in here, inside the asset library, this is where I have linked my outside Blender file. You remember the ASTSO1 psych ward. I've linked that in here, and you can see the link icon to indicate that that's been sort of referenced in. Am I missing a screenshot? I think I am. So basically what you do is you simply go down here and you hit the link button, right? And once you do that, I'm going to put this at 1737.57, 1737.57, and I will call it 58. Okay, so what I've done is I've hit that link and brought that scene file in here I'll actually walk you through the process. So if I sit here and I click link, right, I can go, not my animatic file, I will go into my content and my sets and the psych ward file, right? And if I click link, it will, there we go. It will, this is what I call interrogate the file. It actually dives into the Blender file and shows me what is inside it. So what, do you want to link all this stuff in? No, you want to go in and you want to grab the collection that you want to link in. So I've got two sort of sets, one called the psych ward, the other called the lobby, and I just want to link that psych ward in. So I did that link and it created this guy here and we're all good. It came in and everything was fine, right? So that's how we build that link in there, right? So let me pop back through here. So before we populate our shots, actually, this one, okay, so those are the prop choices. Yeah, so I'm missing that. Oftentimes when I'm working away, right, I'll forget to take screenshots of the stuff that I'm doing. That's why I have to backtrack and go, actually, I need to show them how to do this. All right. In your animatic Blender file, link or reference the asset Blender file in. That makes sense? I hope that reads okay. All right. So basically, you want to link your asset Blender file into your animatic Blender file, right? So then your library of stuff will be available, right? So once you do that, whoops. So once that is set up, you can start to populate your animatic file. Right? So again, we're in our animatic file. If I go back, we've linked in our assets. So now we have something that we can instantiate, right? So we can go to add collection instance and populate our shots with stuff from the AST-SO1 psych ward, right? So that's basically what I'm doing here. An instance is pretty much a linked copy, right? And the difference between a copy and a linked copy is the linked copy, or the instance, is actually much smaller in terms of data footprint and memory. And also, it's linked to the original. So if you change the original, all the instance copies will change. It's kind of like a reference. Okay. That's that. And okay, let's start creating our cameras. All right. So in this particular instance, I've gone in and I've pressed Shift-A to create a camera object. Now this particular camera object is being created in the shot Blender file, in the shot one scene, right? So I'll show you. Let's pop back over into Blender here. And if I come from the asset library and go back to my shot one, this is my shot one, right? This DOP collection is where I put all my cameras and my lights. So I keep those organized there, right? I might need to create a separate collection for lights. Probably will, but I'll do that at a later date. And then here I've got my set, and here I've got my animation, right? So this is generally how I organize the collections. I'm using a way of organizing that I use inside of Maya and inside of other 3D packages, and I'm hoping there's no weird collection quirkiness, that I could organize myself the same way. Okay, so there's that. Let's pop back into the Discord. So here I'm just roughing in my timeline, right? So I've created my camera, and then align the camera to the viewport, right? That's cool. So you do that by setting your viewport roughly where you want it, and then going up to view, align active camera to view, right? So this is cool because what generally tends to happen, which I hopefully got in the next screen grab, is the result. So I'll just upload this the way it is. Dun, dun, dun. There we go. So we got a bit of a result here, right? You can tell because we've got the camera ground glass or frame. Okay, so now we want to add these to our timeline straight away, or at least I do, right? So I like to bring my cameras in, right, and then set them up in the timeline where I want them, right? So, and I believe actually, let me scan through this because I believe this was another point where I just made a little bit of a mistake because I was rushing through it. I believe I created this marker and then bound the camera, renamed the ACAM layout, and then we went to video editing. Yes, that's right. Okay, so let me reiterate by just typing in here. So in the shot 1 scene, we've set up our instanced props, our shot camera, and new lights. So all that stuff is set up. The reference props, the camera, and the lights. Now we want to start building our edit scene. Okay, so that's a mistake I made. I was in too much of a hurry. Started building my edit scene right in my camera scene. And this is not what we want to do, right? There's my oops. Okay, so carry this on from here, and we'll pop this guy in here. And so for this, your edit scene, oops, the video editing tab for that is where we start to build our animatic. There we go. Okay, so I'm just saying, now we add. So here we are. This is our edit scene, right? In the video editing tab, this is where we're going to start stitching together our animatic, right? And here's how we do it. Again, we're in our edit scene, video editing tab. Now when we hit add and scene, you'll see, just like I demonstrated live inside of Blender, is we'll get our different scenes that are labeled after shots. So we'll add shot 1 to this. This will bring the shot 1 and the camera in. And I'll explain a little bit about what's going on here, which is, I think, really, really cool. So, and I'll just post this verbatim. No comment on this. So, this clip that comes in and populates your timeline, just, like Adobe Premiere or Movie Maker or whatever, one of those, Final Cut Pro, Avid, just like a regular video editor, except this is not a video clip. It's a container that contains your geometry or references to your geometry, animation, lights, etc. What does that mean? That means I can edit the data in here. I can reference various different cameras. I can go back to the original scene, change the geometry. It'll update inside of this clip. It sort of connects your 3D assets and your 3D scene with the editorial timeline, which I think is phenomenal. Unreal has been doing this for a while with the level sequencer. So the level sequencer inside of Unreal allows you to bring, using the actor class, bring in a clip, create it inside the level sequencer, but actually all the data inside that clip still references live models, and it's great. It's a beautiful connection. It could be confusing if you're not used to it, but once you are used to it, man, it's hella powerful. It means you can make a wide variety of changes whilst your edit timeline still has the timing of your shots and the rhythm of your sequences kept intact. So it's really, really cool. Okay, so, here. So here I am, I'm just gonna post this verbatim. So now in the editorial project, I have to do a few things that you guys might be used to if you've used Premiere, Final Cut, all that kind of stuff, right? So I had a hell of a time finding this, but I wanted to adjust my time code because when I'm working on the timeline, there's only two setups that I prefer, and this is just me, classical animation training. I like feet and frames, or I like SMPTE timecode. I like to be able to see, I think most people like SMPTE timecode because it's straightforward. You know, it's hours, minutes, seconds, and frames, right? So I needed that SMPTE display. So I went here to adjust that time code and get that SMPTE display. I don't need to comment on that. And then you need audio scrubbing as well for syncing to sound. So here's the other thing that I need. And most animation packages have this on by default, is audio scrubbing. So I had to go into the playback menu and make sure that audio scrubbing was turned on. So what that means is that if I'm lip syncing the sound and I'm scrubbing the timeline, I'll be able to hear a little bit of the sound coming through. Okay. Set frame rate as an output option. Yeah. So here I've already gone through this, right? I'm just going into my rendering window. You actually don't have to pick the rendering tab. You can just click on your output properties here and just set your frame rate. So I set it 24 frames per second. I'm now nice and comfortable and ready to animate, right? Dimensions we've already set. And that's just a gentle reminder of setting frame rate. So here we can bring in our dialogue clips. Okay, so I've adjusted time code, I've set up the audio scrubbing, set the frame rate. Now we can add dialogue. So we do that simply, again, we're still inside the edit scene in the video editing tab. So I'm going over to add and then sound, and this should bring up an Explorer window where we can navigate to our dialogue clips. Oh, I don't have a screen capture for that. That's pretty straightforward. I'll turn on waveforms. There's a lot of stuff to set up, pre-set up, before you can kind of dive in and start really working on your animatic, right? The other thing I like to set up here, and this is under the View tab, under the Editor, is waveform displaying. Turn that on, right? And that gives you that waveform. This is really super handy, guys, because sometimes you match the audio scrubbing, but sometimes you can see, like, if somebody goes, "Hey!" and a really loud shout, you can see that the waveform peaks there. You can find exactly where that hey happens just by looking at that waveform. Super, super handy to set up, right? And let's pop this in here. Okay, so I'll just upload this because I've put in my dialogues here. So this is where we lay out our animatic. Go back and create scenes and shots to lay out here. So that's pretty much it. That's straightforward. The only little niggly thing, and I don't know if it's a GPU display issue, it could be my PC, guys. You guys might see something different in your timeline because this looks like a visual artifact to me. But it's strange that we don't have the video tracks labeled and the audio tracks labeled. I reckon this is just something glitchy going on with my GPU, right? So there should be your video tracks and your audio tracks. Classically, I keep my audio tracks below my video tracks, but that's just legacy Avid and Premiere. Okay, So that's set up and ready to go. And then we move back to shot one layout. Right? Not much to talk about there. You just click on the layout tab. Remember, you're in shot one. Click on the layout tab, right? Because we got everything set up and ready to go. Wow, I did a good job annotating these. Don't really have to add that much. Yep. Check my render output properties. That's all good, right? And okay, so this is cool. Now, creatively placing cameras can be fun with Blender's game cam controls. This is awesome. I love placing cameras this way. So when you hit Shift apostrophe, what'll happen is the camera will drop down to about 5 foot something, right? 6 foot. And you can walk around using WASD. I'll show you. So we'll pop over in here, right? I will hit numpad 0 to get my camera. If I hit Shift apostrophe, now my mouse is my look, and I can walk around. I can walk over to where my main character will be inside this set. I can walk back. You can see I jump up over the bed. So there's collision detection, right? So that, to me, is really, really cool. A very, very cool kind of functionality of creating animatics inside of Blender. There's so much that's cool about creating animatics in Blender. That's why I'm suffering through this. It's really sort of worth it. Okay, so... Oh, so here's the interesting thing. Swimming with locked off shots. And I had a discussion with a couple of my Blender friends about this. So if we use numpad plus and minus, we can zoom the canvas in and out without disturbing the camera placement. That's cool, right? Because sometimes you lock your camera off and you don't want to disturb it, but you want to go in and work on a tiny detail on that little monitor in the distance, right? It becomes really, really difficult unless you can zoom that canvas in, right? So I'll show you what I mean, right? So if I come back into Blender, right? If I, oh, I've got the camera locked. Oh, I don't know how I did that. So let's go. So if I were to sort of zoom in, right, I've lost the relationship of the camera shot to what I'm looking at. It's hard for me to explain because it's it's not acting as I expected. But anyway, if I were to zoom my camera in to make some changes and zoom back, I might have lost the perfect positioning of the camera shot that I initially had set up or that I wanted. But the numpad plus and minus. See what this zoom does? I don't know why my middle mouse scroll button is suddenly doing it. But this is cool. So notice how my camera shot stays the same, but I can zoom in and I can work on sort of the details on this rough character, right? So that's super handy. The only thing that I have issue with is the fact that there's no rotate as well. I wish I could rotate the canvas. You can't do that. And apparently you need to write a Python script to be able to help facilitate that. So they haven't built that in just yet. Believe me, I've investigated it. Okay, so I think here I am... So here I'm setting up my camera for final shots. Little things, little cosmetic things. So in here, I've just gone through and turned on my safe area. And I find that this is quite handy in terms of, for two reasons. One, it helps me with my compositional thinking in terms of, let's just say if I cramp a detail right up to the edges of the frame, it has to be a conscious decision. Otherwise, you create a claustrophobic composition. So having that turned on allows me to kind of be aware of it when I'm shot planning. It also reminds me that I am looking through a shot camera, right? Not a perspective camera, right? So if I'm looking through this with no sort of safe frame markings, hello.
Hey, Des.
Hey, what's up? 1 sec. Okay, guys, I will just give me 1 sec. I'm going to pause. And I will be right back. Hey guys, sorry about that. That was my guys. Holy cow, man! It's like if it's not Xbox, they can't think of anything to do. Oh well, it's all right. So I told them, look, guys, be bored until you think of something to do, right? And I'll be off the stream in a couple of minutes, and I'll go play Apex with them because that's what they want to do. Okay, so final camera setup. That's pretty much it in terms of safe frame stuff. It's just a good habit to get into. Also, a little bit of a tip, makes you look super professional when you're in a studio. Okay, so this is an unusual thing. Gate mask. Just because of the fact that Blender calls it Passepartout. And I have heard this. This is a term used in the industry, but I haven't heard it used for 10 years in CG. So it's kind of cool. I like it when they bring these sort of esoteric terms back, but it's generally referred to as a gate mask, right? So what is it? Well, it's like once you set up your camera, let's take a look at the previous screen grab. It's kind of cool. It's hard to design the composition because I can see, you know, I might design this composition and say, well, I want to reveal that it's a wheelchair a little bit later, right? And I can say, oh, okay, I see a wheel there. I want to move that. But you don't realize maybe that a bit of the wheel is showing there. You might not see it, right? So with this, it allows you to really concentrate on what you actually see through the camera's framing. And you can go, oh yeah, actually there's too much of that wheel being seen, right? So I liked having a gate mask turned on. The one thing that Blender does better is that it allows you to change the opacity of it, which is really cool. Maya just has this default, I think 50% gray, and you can still see through it, but I love the fact that I can dial this up and dial this down as and when I need it. So that's quite cool. And I'll pop this in. Something to watch out for when using shift apostrophe. Something to watch out for when using shift apostrophe, guys. What is that? It is this. Whoa, I fell through the world. Lesson learned. The game cam will need a kill floor or something like, not necessarily a kill floor, but some big collision plane. So when I walk off set, I don't end up falling off the edge of the world, right? So that was quite funny. A little bit caught off guard. So I went into, oh yeah, this was another kind of oops. So I'm going to leave that for now. I'll show you what I did. So basically what I did was I came in here and I added a kill floor or a studio floor into the scene collection for my asset library, which didn't work. And it didn't work because this didn't work because I had the file checked out from Perforce, then I submitted it back in and I didn't recheck it out. So this setting wouldn't save. So I'm going to try this again. So this might actually work. But in the meantime, I'll put this instead. So I went back, and what I did was I added that studio floor to the main Blender asset file. See, so I went into my asset file, the AST file, and inside that I put in my studio floor. I didn't just create the geometry, but I also stuck with the convention of adding a null as well and calling that the studio lot and then putting it in there. Right? And this particular screenshot is, fine-tuning prop placement was difficult with a master AST file. Okay, so I'll show you another lesson learned. So I wanted to stick our character kind of hunched in the corner crying inside the asylum, you know, typical person freaking out in an asylum shot, stick them in a corner, they're hugging their knees, rocking back and forth, all that kind of stuff, right? So I wanted to chuck that person in here, so I'm like, okay, I'm going to move these pieces out of the way. Turns out I couldn't do it. I don't have access to the linked props that came in with the Blender file, right? So I need to go back and rethink that setup. So you can either save individual Blender files for each of these props, which would be really super handy if you were working with, say, a dozen artists, right? So each one can work on individual, like you have an artist working on the armchair, another one working on the lamp, and et cetera, and it's all being referenced in and all updating nicely, and it could work in that particular instance, right? But if you're a single person and you want to create a whole bunch of various different Blender files, it just takes forever, time consuming, right? So you want to create a master sort of AST file. What I forgot is that you can, this may actually work if you selectively if you selectively link in objects. I'll show you what I mean. In fact, I might do this so I can clarify inside this tutorial thread. So let's say, okay, let's go back to our asset library file, right? So here, all I did was link in the entire collection, right? But what if I were instead to come in here and say File, Link, and I'll go to my Content, Sets, Psych Ward. Now in here, instead of going into the collection, what if I went into the individual objects, right? So, is there a way of just grabbing the nulls? So these are the individual mesh files. That's kind of cool. The object files. I'd have to figure out how Blender organizes the object file itself. Or it could be a matter of just once I go into the AST file, creating separate collections for each individual object, right? But I'll have to go in and sort of figure out. Let's just say I can see how it's possible, right? So in this collection, you can see I created one collection for the AST Psych Ward and another one for the lobby. Now in retrospect, I'll probably go back into the Psych Ward file and create a collection for each of the objects, which should be a lot easier than saving off separate blend files, right? So I might do that. And then I can come into the collection folder and just link in all the bits and pieces separately that I need, right? So I think that'll work. Let me actually do a screen grab of that, because I think that's sort of an important thing to talk about. So if I come in here and if I grab this guy, have one Blender file, just need to organize our collections. That's probably the best way to do it instead of figuring out how to bring in an object and making sure the nulls come in. Really, you want to use collections like, I'd use collections like I would group nodes inside of Maya and just have it conveniently set up so that my props were organized in that fashion, right? So let's pop that into 104830. So I'm going to save this. Oops. I'm going to save this. And we were down to 104830. Now I'll go 104831. Add that in there. Once that goes, I will do this. 104831 appears. So let's pop back into our Discord channel, and I will take this guy and pop that in there. Props as collections help facilitate linking. That's cool. I think that works, right? So if we organize our Blender asset file as a library of collections, this should make this a little bit easier. Now, when I worked on Need for Speed Underground, we very much used 3D Studio Max's XREF system in that way. So we'd have one Max file that had like all the urban buildings and then all the suburban buildings. And it was laid out in a grid format so that as it went to the level Ds, they could just XREF in the max scene, but then just pull the individual props that they needed out of the overall scene file. So it's cool. It's a structure that's been around for quite a long time, actually. And it's nice to see Blender's take on it. It's a little bit more sophisticated, which is really cool. Okay, so now we want to bring in our principal character and put her into the asylum. So grease pencil begins. So here I'm placing my 3D cursor where I need it, and then I'm creating a grease pencil stroke. Yeah. Here I created a stroke because it gives me a few useful defaults straight away. I might go back and edit these a little bit later so I can go a little bit more in depth. I just kind of want to crank through these real quick, guys, and get it up and going. So Shift A, grease pencil stroke, and then Tab draw mode, and then set up your 2D animation overlays. Exclamation mark, right? So tab to go into draw mode, right? Tab, draw mode. And click on overlays. We're in draw mode. We want to set up onion skin because we're going to need that later. But I found this, which is really cool, fade objects, which does this thing that grays out all of the objects in the background so you can see your drawing a little bit clearer. And that's fantastic because we also have a slider that controls how much those objects fade. So that's really, really cool. Fade layers, you'll see that later when we start adding a rough layer and a cleanup layer and all that kind of stuff. Really super handy, love it. And choosing your drawing plane orientation. Okay, so a couple of things about that drawing plane. So you've got this drawing plane. You can position it anywhere. It can face the camera normal. It can stay rigid, locked to a single axis. It can take on the orientation of your 3D cursor, or you can separate your stroke and your canvas and pull them apart. I don't know why you'd want to do that. I can't foresee a reason why you'd want to do that. For me, I just want that plane sitting in my 3D scene that I can draw on. Now, a couple thoughts about that, which I think are interesting, which I'll talk about it later. I originally chose origin and front So it would always be front facing, but it would be at a 90-degree angle wherever you put it. But that doesn't quite work because sometimes you're angling the camera for a down shot and things like that. So I think I eventually opted for origin and cursor, right? Oh, I'll pop these in here too. These are just me just showing you the various different options. Draw stroke at object origin. I've kept it at that. Another possibility is to draw stroke at 3D draw stroke at object origin, which is the canvas. Draw stroke at 3D cursor location, which can sometimes be separate. And surface and stroke I skip for now. And the other side of the selection is the cursor. So originally I said set it at origin and front, but here if you choose cursor, it projects the strokes to a plane. No, not locked to the Y. Oh, that's because I'm floating over that. Let's go down here. Let's see what this one says. Right. So with cursor, align stroke to the current 3D cursor orientation. So I decided to go with that. That allows me to move and tilt the plane as much as I need. If it's locked to front, then the projected strokes project strokes to the plane locked to the Y. So it's constantly locked to the Y axis, and that's not necessarily what I want, right? Okay, so outliner or view layer organization. There's a lot of organization and pre-setup that's involved, before you start diving into your animatic, but all of it's really, really important. Okay, so here, I like to keep the grease pencil strokes in their own collection, right? And you can tab out into object mode to allow you to navigate away from the camera view, right? There's that. And let's see what else we got. Dun, dun, dun. And this one that's me setting up my animation collection. So again, my animations are all kept separate inside here, which is really super handy. And in this one, we can custom position our 2D character in situ in the 3D layout. So classically what I'm used to, guys, is a single camera plane, and I would animate the scaling of the character sort of running off into the distance and coming back and etc. And it takes a lot of planning and understanding of perspective and how shapes recede with distance and things like that. But just recently, since discovering what Blender can do, I realized I could probably animate the character full size all the time and simply move the plane where I need that character, wherever I want in the shot. I'm like, wow, that's really cool. That takes an extra layer of thinking away. But it adds a problem though, right? So if I had a character running, I can animate them running full size on that canvas, but I have to time my animation of the steps with the movement of the canvas keyframed across to get that to match up right. So I'll deal with that problem later. There's always the default. The default is I could just create a large canvas that's stuck onto the front-facing normal of the camera, and then just animate that and do it the way I'm used to. So I control the size and the shape of the character running in perspective, but all on one big drawing plane, right? The one thing I know for sure is you have to pick a method. The worst thing you can do is combine the two, because you get confused and you go, maybe I'll keyframe the plane, and in this particular moment I'm just going to animate the size. And if you start moving back and forth and mixing and matching them, you'll lose track. Trust me. Yeah, I think maybe I'm going to try to move the canvas where I want and animate the character at scale, and see how that works. There's a big win with pencil thickness, and that works to your favor as well. So So we'll see, right? Okay, so did I show you guys this? Yeah. Positioned Marilyn where I want her in the room. And then we're almost there. 2 more shots. And there we go. So I'm starting to rough out a pose. Just an idea of it. Nothing crazy. And I think that brings us to the end. Oh yeah. So this is quite cool as well, because not only can I rough out the pose in situ where the character is located, once I hit numpad 0, I can flip over the camera shot and see how she looks in relationship to the camera and to the layout of the other props in the scene. So that's it. That's that whole big stream on how to set yourself up to get ready to animate. And now we can animate. Now, for you guys, where I came up with this source material was not only from my own production experience, but from 2 other sources as well, right? So I'll show you those guys if you want to reference this. So the first one is this Blender Grease Pencil 2D, 3D hybrid story animatic tutorial, right? Not this advertisement. Let's get past.
Life is filled with trying times.
Oh, come on.
But so often, it all comes down to what you...
Okay.
Hello, everybody.
So this, right? Except this particular tutorial delivery did not explain how to set up a proper project workflow in terms of creating an animatic, bringing in 3D props, and working with a group of people, right? So my setup prior to the start of the animation process in this tutorial is better, right? So definitely watch this tutorial. But when you want to understand how to set up your shots, how to set up your camera, how to set up your timeline, then flip over to mine. Or you can watch the second reference, which is this one, which is really, really quite busy in terms of how this person set up. This is probably the better one. So this particular tutorial, Blender 2.8 tutorial, multiple shots, cameras, collections, and video editing. Actually, 90% of the stuff I talk about came from here, except this person doesn't go into the grease pencil stuff, right? So it's an amalgamation of the tutorials, plus what I know about how you need to set up for production artists and things like that. So it's a little bit of me, a lot of this guy, and a little bit of this guy, all kind of thrown in. So if you want reference, in fact, I should actually do the thing. I'll do the thing with the posting of the links, right? So we got one there, and I should label these that I'm posting the reference links in, and one there. So those are 2 really, really good tutorials. Let me come in here and edit this. Let's say references. I'm not going to use Harvard referencing. Is that all right? Not going to use Harvard referencing, guys. I'm just going to come in here and say use that. Can you do the Alt-Enter like you can in Excel? No, you can't. Okay, that's cool. That's all right. So there's that reference there. How do I do a carriage return in here? Escape to cancel, enter to say. There we go. Just a couple spaces. There you go. Anyway, got the links there and the link there. Maybe I'll do that as well. I'll pop this in here and say references, right? And then I got to go and play Apex Legends with my kids. Okay, cool. So this setup, I will be going through again and again every time I set up to do an animatic. I've got 2 semi-professional animatics coming up as not freelance work, but on-spec work for producers. So I can walk you guys through it, and you guys can watch it with the understanding that I'm trying to set this up for a small to mid-sized team. Also thinking ahead to how that can expand to a larger team, right? So if you want to know how that goes, yeah, feel free to tune in. Those of you guys who are working in studio as well, I'm always open for advice and suggestion because no 2 studios are the same. No 2 pipelines are the same. People do things differently. Some of you guys out there might have found efficiencies where I've just completely drawn a blank, and I'm a big pipeline guy, and I'm always open to suggestions and things like that. In addition to that, my experience, although I've peppered it with freelance opportunities in the last couple of years, is really quite dated. right? The last time I did some serious AAA big studio work was, God, a decade ago, right? So any of you guys in the larger studios like the Frame Store and things like that who have suggestions, I am begging you to drop in and put in a comment or that kind of thing. In the meantime, I will leave it at that and let you guys go. Thanks for tuning in. I'm looking forward to picking my streams back up again. It's been too long, guys. I've been away way too long. And I'm going to take down the disclaimer, or not the disclaimer. I'm going to take down the little message about these being free university streams. This is now going open. This is me sharing my thoughts. And I will no longer be streaming university lectures per se on the Twitch stream, which opens it up for me to talk about a whole bunch of other things as well. Okay, so I will leave it at that, and we will